Every car build goes through two major phases. The first is where you gather all of the parts that the car is going to be made of, engine, trans, rear, suspension, all the electrical, and you slam it all together in one piece, get it running. That's the end of phase one. And then phase two is really where the fun starts, and that's where you work out the bugs and you optimize everything in the system. Because no matter how well you plan a build, there's always going to be bugs. There's always going to be little shortcuts that you got to take here and there, and the sorting out process. That's where you refine it. That's where the piece of coal becomes a diamond. And that's where we're at right now with Slaghammer. It runs okay, it runs pretty good, but now we're refining. We're really going through the car end to end and doing, crossing the T's and dotting the I's and taking care of all the shortcuts that we took. But before we get into this, I want to talk about the induction system, the scoop and all of that. We've got to talk about Mission Impossible, which is our 318 build with David Vizard and Andy Wood from Unity Motorsports. So over the weekend, Andy posted the first installment on what they're doing with this engine. They got the carburetor, this little pimple of a BBD on the flow bench to get some initial numbers on it in stock configuration. They're going to start modifying it. And David looked at the rocker arms, the crankshaft, and some other bits and pieces to start putting his plan together. And it's a great video. Go to Andy's channel, Unity Motorsports Garage. They just posted it the other day, and we'll put a link in the description to that video. And while you're at it, make sure you subscribe to both Andy's and David's channel. Now, before I even get into any of this other stuff, on that build, there's some misconception about what we're doing with this. This is not supposed to be an ultimate 318 build. It's not supposed to be something that's like a low budget, trick this and trick that, for pocket change 318 build. This is an exercise. What we're doing here is we're taking a random low performance production engine. In our case, it's a 318, but this could very well be a 307 Chevy, a 304 AMC, a 302, a Smogger 302 Ford. It could be any low performance engine. And what we're doing is we're taking somebody who has the experience, the knowledge that David Vizard has, as well as Andy, and applying it, this full race technology, to these stock parts. And the idea is to maximize every little bit of it and watch how a master does it. You watch this guy in action, you watch his wheels turning, and you see how each of these parts that aren't supposed to make power will make power, the hows and the whys. In this last video, like for instance, David was looking at the rocker arms, and there's just some golden nuggets of hot rod knowledge there. Right? So forget about it being a 318. Even if you're not interested in Chrysler's 318s, you will learn from this series. It's a good series. And the carburetor especially. There are things that Andy is going to do to this little pimple of a carburetor that are going to get it to flow over 300 CFM. Those same principles can be applied to any carburetor, those tricks that he's going to employ. So even though the average person doesn't have a flow bench and all of the things necessary to high science a carburetor, there are going to be tricks and ideas and whatnot that you can learn from this and apply to anything. So that's what's up with that. Unity Motorsports Garage, go over there, check out the video, and I'm going to keep you updated as we go along. There's a lot of stuff happening. Just Mopar Joe has decided he wanted to get involved, and he's sending them parts over to work on and dissect and everything else. It's an interesting project. It's all good. All right, let's talk about Slaghammer now. So, phase one of this project was taking a lot of parts that really don't belong together and modifying them and slamming them together to make the Power Tour, which was a 2,000-mile road trip. And normally, I like to build cars, single-focus cars. So it's either going to be something that drives on the street, and that's its primary goal, or it's going to be something that goes to the track or a street race car, where that's its primary goal. This one here was a series of compromises from one end to the other. And because we were on such a short leash as far as deadline goes, a lot of shortcuts were taken. Like literally from one end of the car to the other, there's stuff that's just slammed together, smashed together. Okay, this doesn't quite fit quite right. This and make it go like that, just to make this event. And we did it. She covered the 2,000 miles flawlessly, did everything it was supposed to. But now we want to make this as good a device as it could possibly be. It'll never be the fastest car on the track, obviously, but I want it to be the fastest thing that it can be. And that's what we're working on right now. So a number of shortcuts that we took were in the name of the car being able to complete this 2,000-mile road trip and do it somewhat in comfort. So for instance, the 3D3 is currently mounted on rubber motor mounts. Now I don't mind rubber motor mounts, they're okay, but as long as there's a limiting device. But we didn't even put a limiting device in here, so everything is free to move around and torque. And the reason we did that was because over 2,000 miles of highway driving, solid mounts are going to be a ton of vibration through the whole car, and what's going to loosen up, and what's going to happen, are you going to have a problem with this? So he says, all right, stock motor mounts, we'll just send it and we'll fix it as we go down the road. So one of the things I'm working on right now is a limiter for the driver's side mount, so that this way there isn't any movement. And that movement became important because I started working on the top. And I have clearance issues between these velocity stacks and the scoop. Now this is another major part where we took huge shortcuts in the name of the car being able to make a 2,000-mile road trip. When we cut the hood to put the scoop, we left this section right here. And the reason I felt that that was important is because over the course of thousands of miles on the road, we didn't need it going like this, which would eventually crack the scoop or break it out from around the screws that hold it in place. So we left this strip right here to keep it solid, which meant as long as the strip was here, we couldn't have any type of velocity stacks or coverings over the carburetors. Because as the hood closes, this part right here cuts right through this. So that was a problem. Then now that this car's road tripping days are done, we don't have to worry about things flexing anymore. We just need to get smooth, clean air to the carburetors. So the velocity stacks are important. And it's not so much a matter of being important because it'll make horsepower, but because it'll make things consistent and even them out. So, all right, before I talk about the scoop, let's talk about the velocity stacks. In this type of configuration, the velocity stacks are not so much important for what goes over the top of them as they are for what's coming at them this way. Because as the car is going down the road, and it doesn't have to be just this car, any car, as the car is going down the road and air is coming through the grille and the radiator and through all of the various openings at the front of the car, it's washing over the motor and it's hitting the firewall over here. As it's doing that, it's creating a very ununiform or chaotic airflow above the carburetor. Carburetor is carburetor. The velocity stack isolates the carburetor, the top of the carburetor, from that chaotic wind. And it allows it to pull from a relatively smooth area over the top. And that's why the velocity stack in this case is important, and that's why we put them on here. It's to keep the airflow basically consistent, because if the airflow is consistent over the two carburetors, then you can make consistent jetting changes. Any type of calibration that you're going to do to the carburetors, you know it's going to have an even air supply, and it's not going to change from, let's say, 30 miles an hour to 80 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour, because the airflow through this section changes in velocity and direction and everything as the speed of the car changes. So again, the idea here is to keep the area directly above the carburetors isolated from whatever turbulence is happening underneath them. So now we get to the scoop. So when we first started this channel, one of the first videos we did that really got any traction was one called the Scoop on Scoops. And it was where I went through, this is like a really primitive video. This was bad, it's cringeworthy. So, but I went through all of the different types of scoops and explained how they worked and the differences between them. And one of them I got into was the Cowl Induction, which is very popular. People right away, when they think Cowl Induction, they think Chevrolet, because Chevy used the Cowl Induction hoods on their muscle cars. But Cowl Induction actually started years before Chevy used it in production cars. It was a NASCAR thing. And the whole purpose of Cowl Induction was to take the air that hits the windshield here and direct some of it down into the carburetors, or into the carburetor on a stock car. So what happens is, car's going down the road, the track, car's moving. And as the air comes over the nose of the car, creates a boundary layer. Well, I'll shut the hood in a second and talk about the boundary layer. It hits the windshield right about here, and it splits. And half the air goes up over the top, and the other half of the air turns around and comes back this way. And that's why these cars here have these vents. This is how you get air through the interior of the car. And this was one of those compromises that we made for the road trip, because we wanted to, it was going to be 100 degrees for a couple of days, for the week. So we wanted to make sure that Al had sufficient fresh air going through the car. So we left these vents open, the Cowl vents open, so that you get airflow. But now we don't want airflow. We don't care about airflow. We care about getting air into the carburetors. So what we're going to do here is we're going to block off these vents, so that this way, as the air comes down off the windshield and starts to head this way, it doesn't get caught in the vents the way these are designed for. It's going to come back and it's going to go into the scoop. So the scoop, so many comments from people who don't understand what this is. Like, what's that ugly box on the hood? This is called a grump lump, and the grump lump is a Cowl induction scoop. This was originated by Bill Jenkins, using that NASCAR philosophy. So, here's how this works, or why this is a beneficial scoop for a lot of applications. Right away, you think that you want the air coming in through the front of the scoop. Snorkel scoop like we have on that car. You want the air coming in through the front of the scoop. You think you have a ram air effect because the air is coming this way. So if it goes in, it's obviously going to hit the carburetors. But it doesn't always work that way. A lot of times, the air coming through the scoop, through the snorkel, is so turbulent or so high velocity over the top of the carburetors that it creates a low pressure area over the top of the carburetors. And it sucks air and fuel up from the top of the carburetor and sends it off into the airstream. That's what Jenkins found when they started using the tunnel rams in 1969. That's what Jenkins found. They used an open-facing scoop, and he found that there was fuel being blown at the top and back of the scoop. So what he did then was applied this NASCAR Cowl induction technology to this and covered his tunnel ram with the grump lump. So the benefit to this, obviously, if you're driving on the street, is that if it rains or anything, well, you can just keep motoring right down the road because nothing's going to come in through the front. But at high speed, high velocity, the air coming off the front of the car, so air comes like this, it doesn't hit the front of the car like this, it piles up at the front of the car, and it comes this way, and it hits the windshield. And when it hits the windshield, it splits, and some goes up over the top, and some turns around and comes this way, exactly this way. And that's what this scoop is faced for, so that the air coming here comes up into the scoop and then over the top of the carburetors. You see how flimsy this is without that piece in there. That's why we left it in. So that's how this whole setup works. This is Cowl induction at its finest. And in order for this to actually function as Cowl induction, this has to be blocked off because this vent right here is going to steal air from the carburetors. So we'll put a piece of sheet steel, rivet a piece of sheet steel over these cowls, over the Cowl vent, and there we go from that. So let me open this back up again. And so that's where we put the velocity stacks on here. And look how cool it all looks, right? I used these valve cover hold downs to hold the velocity stacks in place. This is the minimal height right here to the scoop. So when the hood is closed, when the nose is closed, there's about a ½ inch height difference between this and the bottom of the scoop. And so this right here is basically a positive stop. So that if the nose starts going like this, it won't come down any lower than this and start to inhibit the air to the front carburetor. And then I just put one on the second one to, for symmetry. And it looks so old school. Like, if that isn't 1971, I don't know what is. So that's the setup with that. These are the things we're working on this car. I redid a lot of the wiring, had to redo a lot of the wiring. There was a lot of stuff that was in there that was for street use that out. There were a lot of things that were just jammed together. Again, we want a really strict time frame. This car went from zero. No, well, it didn't go from zero, but it went from a mess to running over the course of 6 months. You know, Al did a lot of work on this thing. I did a lot of work on this thing. It was a pretty monumental test to get this thing up and running and go. So, but like I said, now it's time to address all of the sins and make this the best car it could possibly be. So that's it, guys. I hope you got something out of that. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about on this? No. We'll save it for the next installment. Andy Wood, David Vizard, Unity Motorsports Garage, and David Vizard's channel is his name, David Vizard. Go over there, sub to both of them. Check out that first installment of Mission Impossible. You watch what these guys are doing, and you'll understand where we're going with this project, and it's going to be awesome. All right, guys, that's it. I'll see you tomorrow.